Amanda?" My father's voice sliced through the heavy silence of the dining hall, his words echoing off the marble walls and polished wood. The clink of his knife against his glass plate was sharp, punctuating the accusation like a gavel in a courtroom. I froze mid-bite, the roast duck on my plate suddenly tasteless. Around the grand oak table, everyone's eyes turned to me. Vanessa's cold, triumphant, Eleanor's calculating, a predator waiting for her prey to falter, and Lucas, my younger brother, staring down at his lap as if he could disappear into the rich mahogany grain. "What are you talking about?" I finally managed, my voice low, almost swallowed by the suffocating tension. "What am I talking about?" My father's face, red with fury, contorted as he stood, towering over me. "I'm talking about the missing funds. The stolen money from the estate accounts. You've betrayed this family." The words hit me like a slap.
"What?"
I stammered, looking around the table for some kind of support, some flicker of disbelief in their eyes. "I don't. What missing funds?" Vanessa leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing at the corners of her perfectly painted lips. She reached into her leather folder, her movements slow and deliberate, savoring the moment. From it, she pulled a stack of papers, each one clipped neatly together, and slid them across the table toward me. "Don't play innocent, Amanda," she said, her tone as sharp as the diamond on her finger.
"Go on."
"Take a look." With trembling hands, I picked up the papers. My name was everywhere. Transaction logs, invoices, and even emails, evidence that painted me as the orchestrator of a massive financial scheme to drain the estate's accounts. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a hammer against my ribcage. This isn't real," I whispered, shaking my head as I flipped through the pages. "Don't insult my intelligence," my father roared, slamming his fist down on the table so hard the wine glasses rattled. "Everything is here, Amanda. The proof is right in front of us. And after everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By stealing from your own families?" Tears stung my eyes as I tried to find the words, but they stuck in my throat like shards of glass. "I didn't do this," I croaked. "Dad, you have to believe me. I would never." "Enough." His voice thundered through the hall, silencing me. "I don't want to hear another word from you. You're no daughter of mine." Vanessa's smirk widened, her satisfaction radiating like a predator who had just cornered her prey. Eleanor reached over to place a hand on my father's arm, feigning calm. "Darling," she cooed, "this is hard on all of us, but we have to do what's best for the family. Amanda's actions have left us no choice." "No choice." My voice cracked as I looked around the table. "You're all just going to believe this? You think I'd do this to my own families?" Lucas finally looked up, his face pale. For a moment I thought he might say something, anything in my defense. But he quickly looked away, his silence a knife to my heart. "Pack your things," my father said, his tone colder than I'd ever heard. "You're out of this family. Out of this house. You have until morning to leave." The mansion loomed over me like a cold, unfeeling monolith as I stood at the foot of the grand staircase, clutching the battered suitcase that now held the sum total of my belongings. The once familiar marble floors seemed to glint with disdain under the soft glow of the chandeliers. My footsteps echoed as I descended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air was thick with a suffocating silence, broken only by the faint rustling of Eleanor's gown as she appeared at the top of the staircase, arms crossed and a faint smirk curling her lips. "Leaving so soon, dear?" she asked, her tone dripping with mockery.
I didn't respond.
My throat was raw from the arguments that had erupted hours earlier, and I knew nothing I said would matter to her, or anyone else in this house. Behind her, Vanessa leaned against the banister, her phone in hand. She wasn't even trying to hide her satisfaction. She snapped a photo of me, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "For posterity," she said, her voice echoing down the hall. I turned my back on them, willing myself not to cry as I walked through the grand entrance and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The night outside was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you feel utterly alone. The sprawling estate grounds stretched out before me, the meticulously groomed gardens and winding cobblestone paths now seeming like an extension of my prison. The gates loomed in the distance, tall and menacing, a final barrier between me and whatever lay beyond. I paused at the bottom of the steps, gripping the handle of my suitcase so tightly my knuckles turned white. The urge to turn back and scream the truth at them burned inside me, but I swallowed it down. It wouldn't matter. The sound of the doors creaking open behind me made my breath hitch. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought maybe my father had come to stop me. Maybe he'd realized his mistake. But it was Lucas. He stood in the doorway, his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. For a moment, he looked like he might speak, his mouth opening slightly before he closed it again. "Lucas," I said, my voice cracking. "You know I didn't do this." He looked away, his gaze falling to the ground. "I'm sorry, Amanda," he muttered, so softly I almost didn't hear him.
Sorry.
That was all he had to say. No defense. No support. Just an apology that carried no weight. "Yeah," I said bitterly, turning away. "So am I." The gates groaned as I pushed them open, their iron bars cold under my touch. The night swallowed me whole as I stepped through, leaving the life I had known behind. The dingy apartment I found was a far cry from the sprawling luxury I had grown up in. The walls were yellowed with age, the carpet threadbare, and the single window looked out onto an alley piled with trash. It smelled faintly of mildew, and the radiator clanked like it was protesting its very existence. I dropped my suitcase onto the floor and sank onto the sagging couch, staring blankly at the water-stained ceiling. The events of the past 24 hours played on a loop in my mind, each memory cutting deeper than the last. Vanessa's smirk, Eleanor's icy calm, my father's furious, unforgiving face. I felt hollow.
Numb.
And yet, beneath the numbness, a slow-burning anger began to simmer. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. The friends who had once filled my days with laughter had disappeared as soon as the scandal broke. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. My name was tainted, a stain no one wanted to associate with. The little money I had managed to withdraw before my accounts were frozen wouldn't last long. I'd have to find a job, something to keep me afloat while I figured out my next move. But as I sat there in the dim, suffocating silence of that tiny apartment, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't the end. They had taken everything from me, but they hadn't broken me.
Not yet.
Weeks passed, each day blending into the next as I struggled to survive. I picked up odd jobs wherever I could, waitressing, cleaning, anything to keep the lights on. It was grueling, humiliating work, but it kept me grounded. Late one night, as I sat hunched over my battered laptop, searching for job listings, something caught my eye. It was an old email thread buried in my inbox, one I hadn't thought about in months. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat. Vanessa Hathaway. I opened the thread, my eyes scanning the messages. At first, it seemed like a mundane exchange between her and a lawyer, discussions about estate management and legal contracts. But as I read further, the tone shifted. There it was. A mention of forged documents. My name. My hands trembled as I clicked through the attachments. Scans of contracts bearing my signature, but I hadn't signed them. A cold realization washed over me. Vanessa had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. The simmering anger inside me flared into a roaring fire. They hadn't just framed me. They had built an entire narrative to destroy me, to take everything I had worked for. But they had underestimated me. I wouldn't let them win. The next morning, I reached out to the only person I knew who could help me, Claire. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered her brilliance. In college, she had been the one everyone turned to when they needed a problem solved. She had a knack for uncovering secrets, for seeing the truth buried beneath the lies. "Claire," I said when she picked up, my voice trembling. "I need your help." Claire's voice on the other end of the line was cautious but curious. "Amanda? It's been forever. What's going on?" I hesitated, the weight of the last few weeks pressing down on me. "It's complicated. I wouldn't have called if I didn't need help."
Can we meet?
There was a pause, and for a moment, I feared she might brush me off like everyone else. But then she said, "Of course. Name the place." We met later that evening at a small cafe on the edge of town, far from the glitzy venues we used to frequent. Claire looked just as I remembered, sharp eyes, confident posture, and a quiet intensity that made you feel like she could see right through you. As I laid everything out, the accusations, the forged documents, the evidence I'd uncovered, her expression shifted from disbelief to anger. "They framed you," she asked, leaning forward, her voice low but fierce. "Vanessa and Eleanor actually framed you?" I nodded, my hands clutching the coffee cup like it was a lifeline. "I have proof, but I don't know what to do with it. They're too powerful. Every lawyer I've approached refuses to take the case, and the authorities won't listen to me." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "They think they're untouchable." Her voice was steely now, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Well, they've never met me." Over the next week, Claire and I worked tirelessly. Her background in cybersecurity became our greatest weapon. She combed through encrypted files, traced suspicious transactions, and pieced together the tangled web Vanessa and Eleanor had woven. "Look at this," Claire said one night, pointing to her laptop screen. "Offshore accounts under shell companies, all tied back to Vanessa and Eleanor. These transactions were made to look like estate expenses, but they're clearly siphoning money for themselves." The depth of their betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just about framing me. They had been looting the estate for years, using me as a scapegoat when it became too obvious to hide. "They're monsters," I muttered, my jaw clenched. Claire looked at me, her expression serious. "We're going to need more than this to take them down. You're going to need someone on the inside." The idea of involving James, my father's assistant, came to me late one night as I lay staring at the cracked ceiling of my apartment. He had always been loyal to my father, but he had also treated me with kindness, even when the rest of my family turned against me. I reached out to him the next day, asking him to meet me in a quiet diner far from prying eyes. When he arrived, he looked wary, his usual neat appearance slightly disheveled. "Amanda," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I'm not sure this is a good idea." "James," I said, leaning forward, "I need your help. You know I didn't do this. You've seen how Vanessa and Eleanor operate. They've been stealing from the estate, and they set me up to cover their tracks." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "If they find out I'm helping you—" "They won't," I interrupted, my voice firm. "And if we succeed, you'll be free of them, too. You know what they've done isn't right. Don't let them get away with it." For a long moment, he was silent, his fingers drumming against the table. Finally, he nodded. "What do you need me to do?" With James on our side, we began to unravel even more of Vanessa and Eleanor's schemes. James provided access to documents and records that I never could have obtained on my own. "They're planning a major deal," James told me one evening over the phone. "A real estate transaction that will funnel millions into their offshore accounts. If we can stop it, it'll be a huge blow to them." Claire and I pored over the documents, our determination growing with every new piece of evidence. It was like peeling back layers of rot, each one more disgusting than the last. "They've gotten sloppy," Claire said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "They think they're untouchable." I clenched my fists, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. "Let's prove them wrong." The deal James had uncovered was set to close in just a few days. It was a high-stakes real estate transaction disguised as an estate improvement project, but the funds were being funneled into private accounts Vanessa and Eleanor controlled overseas. Claire and I compiled a detailed dossier, outlining the fraud and linking it directly to them. We sent it anonymously to the authorities, along with key documents from James. The fallout was immediate. The transaction was frozen, and Vanessa and Eleanor were left scrambling to explain the sudden halt. "Vanessa's furious," James reported during our next call. "She's yelling at everyone, trying to figure out who leaked the information." Eleanor, ever the calculated one, was quieter but no less panicked. "They're hiring lawyers," James added. "They know something big is coming." I couldn't help but smile. For the first time, I felt like I was taking back control. Vanessa and Eleanor were losing control. News of the frozen deal had reached the press, and while the details weren't yet public, whispers of corruption began to circulate. Investors were pulling out of projects, questioning the integrity of the Hathaway family. Claire and I decided it was time to escalate. If Vanessa and Eleanor wanted to play dirty, we would beat them at their own game. "We need to expose them," Claire said one evening, her eyes blazing with determination.
Publicly.
"If we get ahead of the story, we can control the narrative and clear your name." The idea terrified me. I wasn't just exposing Vanessa and Eleanor, I was exposing the family legacy, the very foundation of everything I had once held dear. But I knew she was right. I reached out to Sarah, an investigative journalist known for her no-nonsense approach to uncovering scandals. We met in a small cafe, where I laid out the evidence we had compiled. "This is explosive," Sarah said, flipping through the files. "You realize this is going to destroy them, right?" I nodded, my resolve hardening. They destroyed me first. The headline hit like a thunderclap: "Betrayal and Corruption: The Dark Secrets Behind the Hathaway Estate." The article detailed everything: Vanessa and Eleanor's schemes, the forged documents, and the fraudulent deals. It included evidence linking them to offshore accounts and siphoned funds, painting a damning picture of their greed and betrayal. Social media exploded. People who had once admired the Hathaway family were now calling for accountability. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach. I watched the chaos unfold from my tiny apartment, a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness washing over me. This was what I had wanted, but it didn't erase the pain of what I had lost. Inside the estate, the fallout was immediate. James kept me updated through frantic late-night calls. "Your father's furious," he said during one conversation. "He's blaming Vanessa and Eleanor for everything. They're turning on each other." Vanessa and Eleanor were scrambling to salvage their reputations, but the damage was done. Investors were pulling out, and even old family allies were distancing themselves. "They're desperate," James said. "They know they're running out of time." With the article putting public pressure on the authorities, Claire and I worked to strengthen the case against Vanessa and Eleanor. Using the documents James had provided, we traced the flow of stolen money, connecting every dollar back to their accounts. The authorities reopened their investigation, this time with a renewed focus. Arrest warrants were imminent, and Vanessa and Eleanor knew it. "They're panicking," James reported. "Vanessa's been making calls all day, trying to find a way out of this." Eleanor, ever the strategist, was quieter, but her actions spoke volumes. She was preparing for the worst. The news broke on a rainy afternoon. Vanessa and Eleanor were arrested at the estate, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Cameras swarmed the gates as they were led away in handcuffs, their once pristine images shattered. Watching the footage, I felt the wave of vindication. Justice was finally being served. But the victory was bittersweet. They were my family after all, and their downfall was a painful reminder of everything I had lost. With Vanessa and Eleanor facing trial, I was finally able to clear my name. The forged documents were exposed, and my innocence was officially recognized. The public reaction was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in, and old friends who had abandoned me began reaching out. But I wasn't interested in rekindling superficial relationships. I focused on rebuilding my life, starting with the estate. Returning to the estate was surreal. The staff greeted me with cautious smiles, their loyalty fractured by the events of the past months. I walked through the grand halls, memories flooding back. This was my home, but it felt like a stranger's house. The betrayal had tainted every corner. "I'm not here to go back to the way things were," I told the staff during our first meeting. "I'm here to make things right." The estate had been left in shambles, not physically, but financially and reputationally. I worked tirelessly to restore its integrity, meeting with investors, tenants, and community members to rebuild trust. It was grueling work, but it gave me a sense of purpose. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my destiny. One evening, as I sat in the library poring over financial reports, my father appeared in the doorway. He looked older, his shoulders hunched, and his face lined with guilt. "Amanda," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know.
I'm sorry.
I failed you." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly, "but I appreciate the apology." The estate became a beacon of hope, its legacy rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and accountability. The pain of betrayal lingered, but it no longer defined me. As I stood on the balcony, watching the sunrise over the gardens, I realized